When I found out my son-in-law had sold the house right out from under my daughter, leaving her on the streets for another woman, I saw red. I have never been so angry in my life. He really thought he had won and that we were powerless to stop him. I decided to pay him a visit at work to wipe that smug grin off his face. He looked confident until he looked up and realized I hadn't come alone. As soon as he recognized the person standing next to me, his arrogance vanished and he knew he was finished. Robert Davis turned his rusted pickup truck onto the familiar street. He expected to see the warm lights of his daughter's home welcoming him. Instead, the house looked dark and abandoned against the twilight sky. He squinted through the windshield and spotted a small figure huddled near the driveway. Sarah sat directly on the cold concrete curb with her head buried in her hands. She looked completely broken and alone in front of the home she was supposed to own. As Robert slammed his truck door, Sarah looked up with red, puffy eyes. She stood up slowly, her legs shaking as she tried to compose herself. He rushed over to wrap his arms around her, but she pulled back slightly. She wiped the tears from her cheeks and pointed a trembling finger toward the dark house. The front windows were bare, and the usual welcoming decorations were gone. It looked like nobody had lived there for years. Sarah finally found her voice and choked out the devastating news. Mark had secretly listed the property weeks ago and finalized the sale that morning. He never said a word to her until the new owners called to ask about the keys. When she tried to get back inside to grab her things, her key wouldn't turn in the lock. Mark had changed every single lock to keep her out. She was homeless with nothing but the clothes on her back. Robert didn't waste time asking questions about why she hadn't called him sooner. He grabbed the few heavy suitcases sitting on the lawn and heaved them into his truck bed. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed the number for the nearest affordable hotel. Her hands shook so badly that she almost dropped the device on the pavement. Robert secured the tailgate and guided her gently toward the passenger seat. They needed to get away from that house immediately. The drive to the hotel was silent and tense. Robert pulled up to the brightly lit lobby entrance and put the truck in park. He turned to Sarah and instructed her to check in and lock the door behind her. He promised he would return shortly, but he had some business to take care of first. Sarah looked worried, but she nodded and stepped out onto the sidewalk. Robert watched her enter the safety of the building before he pulled away. Robert navigated his truck toward the downtown district where the expensive restaurants were located. He had a hunch about where Mark might be celebrating his newfound freedom. As he cruised slowly past a high-end steakhouse, something flashy caught his eye. Mark's silver luxury sedan was parked right in the front row of the valet section. It shone under the streetlights like a trophy. Robert felt his grip tighten on the steering wheel as he found a spot across the street. From his vantage point, Robert had a clear view through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows. He saw Mark sitting at a prime corner table, looking more relaxed than ever. A young woman in a red dress sat across from him, laughing at something he said. Mark poured wine into her glass with a wide, carefree smile. He clearly didn't care that his wife was currently sitting in a cheap hotel room. The sight made Robert's blood boil. After an hour, the couple stood up and made their way toward the exit. They walked out of the restaurant doors hand in hand, completely absorbed in each other. Passers-by had to step around them on the sidewalk, but neither Mark nor the woman noticed. They acted like they were the only two people in the world. Robert sank lower in his seat to remain unseen in the shadows. He needed to see exactly where this night was going. They stopped right next to the valet stand while the attendants retrieved their cars. Mark pulled something small and metallic from his pocket and pressed it into the woman's palm. It was clearly a set of keys, and the woman beamed as she inspected them. They shared a brief embrace before the valet pulled Mark's car around. The woman walked toward a white convertible while Mark got into his sedan. It seemed they were heading to the same destination separately. Before the engine started, Robert raised his phone and snapped several rapid photos. He zoomed in to get clear shots of their faces and the affectionate way they held hands. He made sure to capture the exchange of keys as well. Once he had the evidence he needed, he put the phone down. He waited until both cars merged into traffic before he started his own engine. He had seen enough for tonight, and now he had a plan. Robert arrived back at his quiet house and didn't even bother to take off his coat. He marched straight to his desk and flipped open his old laptop. The screen flickered to life, and he immediately opened a web browser. He typed in the name of the prestigious financial firm where Mark held a senior position. The company prided itself on family values and integrity. Robert needed to verify if those values were actually written down somewhere official. The website was slick and filled with photos of smiling families and corporate slogans. Robert clicked through the About Us and Investor Relations tabs without finding what he needed. Finally, he located a small link labeled Resources at the bottom of the page. He clicked it and found a downloadable PDF of the employee handbook. This document outlined everything expected of the company's staff. He hoped it contained the leverage he needed to bring Mark down. The file opened slowly, revealing over 100 pages of corporate legal text. Robert scanned the table of contents, looking for keywords like behavior or conduct. He skipped past the sections on vacation time and dress codes. His eyes finally landed on a chapter titled Executive Standards and Ethical Conduct. He scrolled down to that section, his heart pounding in his chest. If the company took its reputation seriously, this section would be the key. Robert read the text carefully, his finger tracing the lines on the screen. The policy was explicit about how executives represented the brand in their personal lives. It stated that any behavior deemed immoral or scandalous was grounds for immediate termination. Adultery and public scandals were listed as specific violations of their strict moral code. This was the perfect leverage to destroy his arrogance. Mark had signed this contract, and he had clearly violated it. The printer whirred to life as Robert printed the incriminating page. He took the warm paper and placed it inside a crisp manila folder. Next, he went back to the website to find someone with real power. He didn't want a low-level HR representative. He needed a decision-maker. He found the list of board members and spotted a name he recognized from the news. He wrote down the contact number and prepared to make the call. The next morning, Robert stood outside a bustling coffee shop in the financial district. He smoothed his shirt and checked his watch, arriving 10 minutes early. A sleek black car pulled up, and an older man in a tailored suit stepped out. It was Mr. Henderson, the board member Robert had contacted. The man looked serious and checked his surroundings before approaching. They shook hands briefly and found a quiet table in the back corner of the shop. Robert didn't waste time with small talk or pleasantries. He placed the manila folder on the wooden table and slid it across to Mr. Henderson. Inside were the photos of Mark with his mistress and the highlighted policy page. Robert kept his hands folded on the table, watching the other man's reaction. He needed Mr. Henderson to understand the severity of the situation. This wasn't just a personal grievance, it was a liability for the company. Mr. Henderson opened the folder and adjusted his glasses. He studied the photos of his high-level manager openly cheating in public. Then he read the highlighted section of the company bylaws that Robert had included. The cafe bustled with noise around them, but their table was an island of quiet intensity. Robert sipped his black coffee and waited for the verdict. He watched the older man's jaw tighten as he processed the evidence. After several long minutes, Mr. Henderson closed the folder with a sharp snap. He looked Robert in the eye and gave a single, firm nod. There was no hesitation in his demeanor anymore. He stood up from the small wooden table and tucked the folder under his arm. He didn't say a word, but his expression communicated everything Robert needed to know. The evidence was undeniable, and action had to be taken immediately. Robert followed Mr. Henderson out of the coffee shop and onto the busy sidewalk. They walked side by side toward the towering glass skyscraper down the block. This was the building where Mark felt untouchable in his corner office. The morning sun reflected off the windows, making the structure look imposing. Robert felt a surge of adrenaline as they approached the revolving doors. He was about to walk into the lion's den, but this time he was the hunter. The security guards nodded respectfully to Mr. Henderson as they breezed past the front desk. They stepped into the private elevator reserved for executives and hit the button for the top floor. The ascent was smooth and silent, giving Robert a moment to steel himself. The doors slid open to reveal a plush hallway lined with expensive art. They walked straight toward the main boardroom where the morning meeting was already in progress. Robert pushed open the heavy double doors, interrupting the presentation. Mark was at the head of the table, laughing at a joke he had just made. He stood up with a confident grin, ready to dismiss the intrusion. Then his eyes locked onto Robert and the smile faltered slightly. When he saw Mr. Henderson step out from behind Robert, the color drained from his face. The room went dead silent as Mark realized the gravity of his situation. Mr. Henderson didn't wait for Mark to speak or offer any excuses. He walked to the front of the room and threw the manila folder onto the table. With a cold voice, he announced that Mark was fired effective immediately. He cited the violation of the moral code and the embarrassment caused to the firm. Mark stammered, looking around the room for support, but his colleagues looked away. He had arrived with the CEO, who fired him on the spot. The humiliation was absolute as Mark was ordered to clear out his desk. Under the watchful eyes of two stone-faced security guards, he threw his personal items into a cardboard box. He tried to grab his company laptop, but a guard blocked his hand. He was left with nothing but a framed photo and a stapler. He walked the long hallway to the elevator, keeping his head down. Robert watched him go, knowing justice had been served. Mark stepped onto the curb, stripping off his ID badge with shaking hands. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he answered it, hoping for some comfort. Instead, his mistress's voice was cold and detached on the other end. She had already heard the news about his termination and wanted nothing to do with a disgraced, unemployed man. Losing his income meant losing his mistress, leaving him completely ruined. He stood alone on the street, having lost everything.